Is it true that Almighty Allah was interfering to problems of the Prophet Muhammad with his wives? Is it true that God was interested in his personal life? Is it true that the Holy Quran was supporting the Prophet against his wives? Did it support his sexual whims? Are the actions of the Prophet in his personal life binding to Muslims? Welcome to Shoaib Show. Welcome to Shoaib Show. Our paramount question today: is it true that the Holy Quran supported the Prophet Muhammad and resolved his personal issues? Is it true that our Lord, the Most Magnificent, used to justify whatever the Prophet Muhammad liked, and that is why Aisha said to him, "I see your Lord hastening to satisfying all your desires"? We shall figure it out. The Egyptian researcher Islam Abdul Wahab begins his article with the Quranic verse. "Say you, O Muhammad, I am but a man like you, it is revealed to me by inspiration." Because, in his opinion, and I agree with him, it determines the nature of the difference between the Prophet Muhammad and other human beings. The difference is in the revelation only, or in that he is a messenger with a message. His role is specifically that he conveys it to all human beings. Nothing more, nothing less, nothing else. And therefore, Muhammad as a human being, like all human beings, can make mistake. The Holy Quran in the case of the Prophet Muhammad was supportive and in favor of him, and at times it criticized him. Not only on the apostolic side, for he was criticized as an apostle of Allah. This may be understood within the framework of religion, but the weird thing is that he should be favorably disposed towards him in his personal life, and more so in his married life. So, what is the reason? For example, when his wives objected and railed against him, the Quran chastised them. The narrations report that he used to divide his time between his wives. The Muslim historian and jurist Al-Tabari relates on the authority of Ibn Abbas, that the Prophet had intercourse with the Coptic mother of Ibrahim, but in the house of his wife Hafsa, and on the day designated for Hafsa. Of course, Hafsa got angry, and said to the Prophet, "O Prophet of Allah, you have committed against me something like this, and you have not committed that against any of your wives. That is, you did against me what you never did to the rest of your wives. You had sex with Maria the Copt on the day allotted to me, even on my bed." It seems that she was furious with indignation, because the Prophet replied to her and said, "You would like me to deny myself the right to copulate with her, and not to approach her again?" She said, "Yes, that is, she wants that denial." So, the Prophet denied himself copulating with her, meaning that he would never have intercourse with her again, neither in Hafsa's bed nor anywhere else. And if we believe this narration of the Muslim historian and jurist Al-Tabari, then we will find that the Prophet was worried and confused, because he asked Hafsa not to tell anyone, but she informed the other wife of the Prophet, Aisha. We go back to the Holy Quran, and most of the exegetes of the Quran say that what the Prophet loved and desired was restored back to him. And the Quranic verse was revealed, "O Prophet, why do you prohibit yourself from what Allah has made lawful for you, seeking the approval of your wives? And Allah is forgiving and merciful." It means, as the researcher Abdul Wahab says, the Quran spared the Prophet the embarrassment and re-allowed what he had forbidden to himself, in order to satisfy Hafsa. In other words, to go back to having intercourse with Maria. This is a bizarre matter that our Lord, glory be to him, intervenes himself, through the Quran, to solve the marital problems of the Prophet Muhammad. The weird thing is that, for example, he did not interfere or even mention the matrimonial life of Prophet Muhammad with Khadijah. There is no hadith from the commentators about the matrimonial life of the Prophet with Khadijah. Why did this happen after her death? Why focus on the matrimonial life of the Prophet after the death of Khadijah? I really have no clue. It is important to say that we do not have any scientific evidence of the story from which historians interpreted the verse. So, it is possible that they fabricated it. Where did al-Tabari know this story from when he himself was born about 200 years after these events? He must have reported it from oral tales, narrated generation after generation. Unwritten stories, meaning that there is no manuscript, and perhaps it did not occur at all, or did not happen in the way that al-Tabari tells it. Because it is impossible to transfer anything literally exactly as it is for 200 years. Therefore, we have no evidence that this verse was revealed for this reason. It was revealed in order to tell the Prophet that he had intercourse with Maria and that this is permissible, so do not forbid yourself to do it. The second matter is that the speech of our Lord, glory be to him, is directed here to the Prophet, not to the Messenger, and the difference is great, and I will explain this later. Now, we will discuss the story of the Prophet's wife Zainab bint Jahsh. The researcher Abdul Wahhab says, and I agree with him, that the Arabs before Islam had customs and traditions, and Islam itself agreed on many of them, and they became part of it, that is, they became integral to Islam. There are other customs among the Arabs that Islam did not adhere to, such as the prohibition of marrying the wife of an adopted son. That is, the prohibition of your marriage to the wife of your adopted son. The Muslim historian and jurist al-Tabari says that this prohibition changed when the Prophet went to the house of his adopted son Zayd bin Haritha, and saw his wife Zainab, who was a beautiful white woman. He said, "Glory be to Allah, the turner of hearts." That is, she fascinated the Prophet as a female. Zainab heard him and told her husband. The son of the Prophet, by adoption, said to him, "I ask your permission to divorce her, for she is arrogant, i.e., haughty, and also hurts me with her tongue." As if he suddenly noticed this, but it is clear that he felt that the Prophet Muhammad admired her as a female, so he tried to find an excuse to divorce her in order to leave her to his father, Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet replied to him, "Pursue your marriage and fear Allah." That is, the Prophet refused to let his son divorce his wife. Clearly, it was an embarrassing situation, as the researcher Abdul Wahhab says. How can he dare to ask Zayd to divorce her so as to immediately marry her? It's tough. According to the Muslim jurists, al-Tabari, Ibn Qatada and some of the exegetes, intervention of the Quran to solve the difficult problem. The Quran says, "And remember, O Prophet, when you said to the one for whom Allah has done a favor and you too have done a favor, keep your wife and fear Allah, while concealing within yourself what Allah was going to reveal. And so you were considering the people, whereas Allah was more worthy of your consideration." And we generally cannot say that this verse indicates that it was revealed for this story, as the exegetes say. The second verse reads, "So, when Zayd totally lost interest in keeping his wife, we gave her to you in marriage, so that there would be no blame on the believers for marrying the ex-wives of their adopted sons after their divorce. And Allah's command is totally binding." The former Sheikh of Al-Azhar, Muhammad Sayyid Tantawi, supports the opinion of the Muslim historian and jurist al-Tabari and others. The Quranic verse, as you have seen, does not contain any details, and the story told by the exegetes have no definitive evidence on it so far, as I have already said. The second issue, did our Lord need this story in order to forbid adoption? He could have forbidden it instantly, as he did for many things. And above all, is it permissible to forbid adoption, based on this verse, when we do not know what it is talking about in the least? Or is it just a story from which we are not supposed to make judgments? I think that the issue needs to be reconsidered, because this ruling has caused harm to millions of orphaned children throughout the history of Muslims. As the Arabic narrations report, Lady Aisha, the Prophet's wife, was troubled by his many marriages. She was very jealous. This is normal, any woman is jealous because her husband marries another every so often. I mean, Aisha is not wrong, But that is normal human nature, and the opposite attitude is what is definitely abnormal. She was mad when the Prophet was annoying her by accepting, for example, a woman giving herself to him. Then our Lord intervened through the Quran and said, "It is up to you, O Prophet, to delay or receive whoever you please of your wives. There is no blame on you if you call back any of those you have set aside." And let me tell you again that the verse, as you can see, makes no mention of marriage and can be interpreted in more than one way. For example, the Prophet protects those who take refuge in him. But the jurists interpreted it as having the right of the Prophet to marry any woman who gives herself to him. And as the exegetes say, Aisha shockingly said to her husband, the Prophet Muhammad, "I see your Lord hastening to appease you and fulfill all your desires." I mean, our Lord Almighty satisfies whatever you wish. And if we believe the story that the narrators mentioned about the reasons for the revelation of the verse, then, undoubtedly, the Prophet's wife Aisha shall be right. Fine, what is the conclusion of all this? First, from my perspective, it is not correct to explain the verses of the Holy Quran with stories that do not have any proof. Because this is dangerous, and makes us follow a few Muslims who have interpreted the Holy Quran with fairy tales, for which there is no evidence. Therefore, predominantly, their interpretation is wrong, and it may corrupt the meanings of the verses as you can see. The other important matter is that the interpretation of Al-Tabari, or others jurists, is just an opinion, from a Muslim like you and me, and therefore, there is no need for us to consider such an opinion to be sacred. There is no sanctity in this regard. Thus, we can reject it as long as it violates common sense, such as the story that the Prophet married his adopted son's wife. Or that our Lord himself would intervene in a marital dispute with Hafsa. And others and more. I think we need to liberate the Quran from this method of interpretation. The last thing, in my opinion, and I invite you to think about it, is that what the Prophet did in his personal life, whatever it was, I mean, the way he manages matrimonial life, for example, is not binding to us, and it is not integral to religion, and it has nothing to do with piety. They are just stories. Furthermore, his battles and armed struggles that are woven by the narratives against the Jews, Christians, polytheists, and others. Are we supposed to imitate him? i.e., killing the youth of the Banu Qurayza tribe, capturing its women and children, and seizing their money and land? Or else should we imitate him when he entered Mecca city with an army, and killed some of his opponents, and should we completely prevent, as he did, the existence of any other religion? From my personal standpoint, no, because that is not part of the message he is supposed to convey to us. Most of the verses in which these conflicts are mentioned say, "O Prophet," not "O Messenger." And because, if we do what the narrations asserted that the Prophet did, there will be a big problem. For example, do we forbid any religion other than Islam in a country that is predominantly Muslim? Should we do what he did when he seized power in Mecca? I think that these stories are stated in the Quran so that we may know only, that is, so that we may have an idea of what was happening at the time, just stories, not historical facts. Thank you, my friends and fellows, and see you later in future episodes, God willing.